My name is Scott. I'm from the Chaddick Institute for Metropolitan Development. We're based in DePaul University in the Loop campus. It's always great to get the contrast between Arlington and Chicago because we have I think 5 times the density, but interesting opportunities, similar challenges and opportunities. We have, in trying to keep up with it in terms of reports and research because it's moving so quickly, we actually, over the past year, published some reports on a lot of shared mobility topics. We have a couple journals there, but most recently, and what I'll be talking about today is our research on e-scooters and the potential there, some of the challenges, as well as, so we go from micromobility to macromobility, where we're looking at peer-to-peer vehicle sharing. So those are the 2 reports kind of focusing on today. So I'm going from e-scooters to cars again. The motivation for the research is similar though for all these reports really. One, the technology is rapidly changing, becoming more widely available. We're having, in lots of cities, more and more transportation options, which makes transportation research so exciting right now. Also, the problem with that is that I think cities, municipalities, transportation planners having a difficult time of figuring out how to make them work within their domain. And that's, I should say, not only municipalities, but the private sector as well. I think everyone's challenged by how to maximize these options while keeping in mind our goals. But there's a huge, and the other part of this is, you have the huge private investment, so making lots of demands on municipalities. And we're calling this, faster than how government municipalities usually work. So you have commissions and their schedules and this and that, and you have lots of money and investors and this knocking on your door, and it sounds like Lime is knocking on the door of Kalamazoo right now, wondering what to do, and they have a meeting next week. So there's this decision velocity imbalance, how do we make these decisions with so much pressure? So we need more of us, more people researching, providing timely policy guidance and so on. So I'm just justifying our work, But anyway, maybe at a broader perspective, we're hoping to have more multimodal planning going on and integrating that with shared mobility to create a higher performing, integrated, multimodal, you could even add sustainable transportation system that really achieves both public and private goals. It has to achieve both kind of to make it work. I'm ripping some of this from a report I found very useful. Anyway, you can look at this. But right now I talk about e-scooters. So how many of you have actually ridden an e-scooter, one of these e-scooters sharing? Okay. Yeah, all those who go to TRB, I think DC has 8 different operators running right now. But there's, looks like, part of sustainable transportation is actually make transportation fun. These people look like they're kind of having fun. And those who aren't aware, you can use your cell phone, unlock a scooter that's on the street. They're dockless, and then you hop on. Usually, it's about $1 to unlock it, and 15 cents a mile usually is what the price point is. And some people ride them responsibly, not so responsibly. This is in Cincinnati, but I remember going in Detroit. I saw a lot of people 2 per scooter and riding places they don't ride, but you probably know all of that. But what you see normally is kind of clusters of them. I was down in Tempe, Arizona earlier this year, and you can see they have a diversity. It's a very diverse scooter environment as well. And there's one that looks like, part scooter, part bike. But they usually cluster, after charging them at night, they release them in the morning. In fact, this is a morning shot. You look, all the Lime scooters are together, all the Bird scooters are together. So you kind of see this, and you can just, take your pick. They're dockless, so fairly accessible, right? Problem with this is that while this is also in Tempe, Arizona State, has banned these, on their campus. It was right in downtown Tempe because here's the statement, which is off. I'm hoping that, anyway, they say something about nuisance, potential danger when operated without proper training and education. So there's no training that you need. You just need an app and a credit card, and to be a certain age typically, hopefully, to get on one of these, right? So they ban them, and they, theoretically, people aren't able to ride these, within the red zone here. And they actually did that, those of you who rode a scooter in DC, around the National Mall. It's actually a red zone. But in reality, I don't know if this is fake news, but they did, they're still riding them around ASU campus. This is from someone's blog post showing all the scooters within the red zone of ASU campus. But they did impound 888 scooters from ASU. And the problem with that is, well, for Bird, was that $100 per scooter impounded plus fees. So they've paid, within a span of 2 months, $61,000 to the city of Tempe for having to move them away from campus. I'm just kind of going through this quickly. I was just going to mention some of the downsides. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the full deal, but anyway, there was a recent study just in April talking about one of the concerns about these scooters is just injuries related to them. Probably the most comprehensive paper that I've seen so far about this was based in Salt Lake City. They had a control of a year looking at 2017 scooter injuries, comparing that with 2018 after the launch of their scooter program. And the number of injuries jumped from 8 to 50. And 8% of them major head injuries, 36% major, musculoskeletal injuries. So, I mean, according to this one, there are some real concerns there. The other part is 16% of the people riding were intoxicated in alcohol, and then none of them were wearing a helmet, of course. And 90%, there have been some studies nationwide. 90% of e-scooter riders don't wear a helmet. So what we did a year ago today, this is when this mode was like new, just taking off, because this is like, it's kind of like mode du jour. What is the mode of the time? And so these are old data, but we looked at various vendors. We looked at where they're headquartered, how many cities were they operating, what was their valuation. I updated this a little bit on the train out here this morning. Bird and Lime now operate in 77 and 85 U.S. cities respectively. Spin was purchased by Ford Motor Company in November 18. They're valued at about $90 million at the time of purchase. Lyft was operating, I think this is actually a little old, like January. Lyft now is expanding to like 8 other cities with their e-scooters, so there's a lot going on. We also looked at in terms of vehicle specifications by e-scooter vendor. Most of these scooters are pretty similar, although you see that the diversity is kind of growing. They're trying to make them last longer, a little bit more durable, especially if they want to grow outside of the Southwest and outside Florida in big numbers. Some of them have different range. The max speed for the most part are 15 miles an hour. Average observed speed for the most part about 7.5 miles per hour. But anyway, there's some differences, similarities there, but they're changing. Oh, image didn't show up. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a couple, challenges. A lot of times when the scooter companies came out, they would just drop all their scooters. You probably read about this in the news, like San Francisco dropped the scooter. I was in San Francisco for the planning conference last month and heard, the planners talk about, and they were like, it was like Christmas. It's like they just, all these toys all of a sudden appeared in the street, and but it's kind of like what no one wanted, right? And some people wanted it, but then they stopped. They had a cease and desist, and like a month later, and then they went through this longer process, and now 2 companies are operating there as of last time I looked at this. Nashville, the scooter companies dropped them on the streets in July 2018. Cease and desist, July 2018. It was just like right after that. Same thing in Scottsdale, Arizona. A lot of times they bring them back. They bring them back with more regulations. Have a little bit more planning behind it. But that was kind of the modus operandi originally. It was just drop them and see what happens. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The prior slide.
Oh.
There was a note that I didn't see.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to mention here that there was, it's different than, they kind of took over from Dockless Bike Share in the sense that, Dockless Bike Share, the bikes were for one, I think it was just people like the scooters more, but also, they're not very costly little machines, So you see a lot of turnover, and that's one of the differences of these. So, I think they're on their third generation now of this certain sort of scooter. Originally, they were just kind of modified consumer models. Now they're more, built for sharing, more industrial. What's interesting here, also, we were looking at, what cities are starting to look, what do we do when it's dropped in the wrong place, or if it's not parked properly, or if it's in the river, or if it's in a tree. They now are trying to, they have these fees. They have removal and relocation fees I was mentioning, Tempe, Arizona, and so on. So anyway, they have permits, or permit review process. All of these kind of are becoming part of how, the method of operating within a city. So there are these several regulatory dimensions around scooters. Those of you, in fact, Kathy, I think, left. Kathy Schultz from Kalamazoo. But, you can just look at, how many should we allow? Where should people ride? How are you going to share data with us? All these sorts of things are all part of the what to consider. I'm actually going to pass on this because it's not our research yet. So I had to get into our research before my time's out. All right, so what we wanted to do is forget all the politics, right? Forget all of the injuries and all that. How do cities actually fit in within the network, like a multimodal network that's already pretty rich within the Chicago area? So we were just looking at it from a network perspective. So we used some input data, OpenStreetMap. We used CTA, the bus and L system. We used the bike share divvy system, as well as a simulated e-scooter scenario. And the idea is that, Chicago has been taking this watch and learn, more of a precautionary approach when it comes to these micromobility options. We had a pilot dockless bike share, but nothing formal. We don't have dockless bikes. Actually, we just signed a 9-year agreement with Lev, but it hasn't come yet. They were really hesitant. There are no e-scooters operating in Chicago right now. Next week, another story. But they were really behind, taking a precautionary approach. So we had to get ahead of it. And this, I think, it's a good lesson for planners, for researchers. How do we get ahead of it? How do we simulate, how a mode will work in an environment? So we used OpenTripPlanner, which allows for that multimodal analysis, as well as some automating of that. And in order to create a multimodal kind of transportation network, we were able to get at all of these numbers, average trip time or trip times, multimodal trip times, also cost factored in. How much are we paying by public transit? What if you do it? There are no transfers from scooter to transit right now, so you're just paying double, or all these sorts of things. So, and also, what does it cost to go by automobile? So we brought in all the costs and compared these modes. And how they interact with one another. So these are some of our assumptions about the modes. One thing, these speeds are obviously different. This is one of the challenges for planners, how to deal with these varying speeds. We're not formally, we know how to plan for bikes. I would say for pedestrians, we know how to design for bikes. Not that we're doing it necessarily, but there's a lot of background there. We have no clue how to put scooters on the street yet. NACTO, I don't think, has come up with their like a scooter chevron or something like that for scooter areas, or even a continuum of speeds. So we were looking at what are the speeds. We assume like a 30-second pickup and 30-second drop-off penalty for scooter and bike rental. So these are our assumptions in the model, and so these are all the different combinations we were looking at. For the e-scooter rental scenarios, how they operate then is going to be different because the resources, the transportation infrastructure, and the population, so on, very different areas of the city. So we looked at the north, west, and south case studies in isolation. I'm showing them all at once, but we looked at them in isolation. Scooter trips within the north study area, within the west, within the south study area. And what's interesting about this is, in the west and the south, you have some transit deserts there. So you would assume maybe scooters could play a better role at making those connections to transit where you have gaps or something like that. So that was another reason we looked at the different modes. So this is just, a display of, if we were to throw these scooters down, this is, we had 3 different scenarios. This is the lower, it looks like a lot. Wow. For each of these, it was, I think on average, 50 per square mile, I think is what we had here for each of the different areas. Just as comparison, for Divvy Bike Share, they average for the study areas between 5 and 7 per square mile by station. And that's kind of the novelty of this, is dockless can be more diffuse. So we looked at, I think it made an assumption of up to like between 50 and 100 per square mile on these scenarios, which was in line with what Bird actually does in some of these. Now, I was supposed to do this earlier. Full disclosure, we got financial assistance from Bird to do this study. But it was fully independent, of them. But this is what we were able to do with the model. This is just a, example. Here you have a, begin and end point. We were looking at different modes, how they work with one another. This is kind of this inset map showing that origin down here in greater detail. And you can see there are a lot of scooters. There's a Divvy Bike Share. There's a Divvy Bike Share. Only one within that quarter-mile walking area. And then, so we can look at it just in terms of walking. How long does it take? And what's the distance? We also have costs associated with, monetary costs associated. We can look at just, single mode, bicycle. What does it take to get that 3.7 miles? How about, walking to the bus stop and then completing a trip with another walking, and then, or looking at Divvy Bike Share, or walking to the nearest scooter and getting there, or going from walking to a scooter to transit to walking. Those are the sorts of combinations we're able to simulate within the model, okay? So this is kind of how it looked just globally for all of the study areas in terms of median travel time. So of all the trips that were simulated, this is just one simulation of about 30,000. And you can see that, you have private car beating everybody. Assumption there is there's no congestion. So we're really, it's an optimistic estimate by private car. And also it may even become more optimistic because there's a proposal to reduce all the speed limits downtown to 20 miles an hour, which could happen soon. Private bicycle came in second. Private e-scooter, if you had your own e-scooter, not worried about picking one up, then where they were located, then it was relatively fast. But you see, here it is, all the e-scooter rental plus transit performs pretty well. And then better than Divvy Walk Transit. And then an e-scooter rental alone it doesn't perform as well as Divvy Walk Transit, which is kind of interesting. And then walk and transit, all the way, down to walking. But, of course, it's a different, this is looking at trips 7 miles or less. So it's a fairly, some of these are pretty long trips. The other part that we looked at was, okay, within the study areas is kind of interesting, but let's say, let's take your standard commute from any one of these hexagons to a loop for work, which is a common commute. You have about, well, the mode share in Chicago is, right now it's 58% people drive and the remainder take something else. You have like close to 28% using transit. So this sort of commute is typical. How much in terms of employment accessibility, how much do you gain by adding e-scooters to the mix? So we were looking at here, generally residents in the 3 case studies could reach about 16% more jobs within a 30-minute commute if you add scooters to the mix. So it helps make those connections. And that's just on the front end of their trip. We're not, because we're assuming that you don't have any scooters in the loop. And like we thought, in the south and in the west, you see this pocket here. That's because it's a transit desert, right? So if you could potentially make those connections. And same here, you have 37% more jobs accessible by scooter. So just from a network, again, a network perspective, you can look at those things. So here are some of our findings. I don't know, how am I doing on time? Because I have another study I wanted to talk about. So I wasn't, yeah, let me see. 5 seconds, yeah. Yeah, so, these are, what we generally found from these is that there's a sweet spot, like between a half mile and 1.5 scooters really are potentially a good mode option, mode opportunity. And that's because of, you can make these connections pretty quickly, and it's less money and more convenient than, say, taking car or divvy. The other part of it was, just looking at it in terms of cost. It becomes a little more expensive when you get a 3-mile range. For assuming about $1.33 per mile, it gets quite expensive. The other part of this is that, it varies, as I said, between geographic areas and so on. And interesting, we did have someone from the Chadwick Institute on the New Mobility Task Force that in September 2018, Mayor Emanuel put together. And there were about 20 experts. You can see maybe Ray LaHood here was chair, former transportation secretary. And they came up with this roadmap for the future of transportation mobility in Chicago in March. And part of that was recommending that the city do a pilot, for e-scooter. And this is the map from the city of Chicago. It's going to begin June 15th. They're allowing between 2,500 and 3,500 scooters to be distributed across the west and parts of the south side of the city. They haven't lined up the operators, I don't think, yet. What's interesting here, too, from an equity perspective, at the end of each evening, they need to allocate 25% within each of these 2 priority areas. So you can do that with the geofencing and so on. Just hope it's enforced. But anyway, I'd like to think our study had something to do with that.
What makes them priority areas?
It's transit poor areas, and it's areas where they want to provide more mobility options. Yeah. This could be the new mode next year. I do not know. But anyway, another study very quickly is this when we were looking at peer-to-peer vehicle sharing. So this was partially funded by Turo car company. And I was thinking, I took the train here. I need to actually go 30 miles from here after tonight to stay with friends. And I was like, I'm going to have to rent a car. Either it's like the Enterprise or it's maybe Turo. Turo allows someone to, you have an app. Anyone use Turo or something like that? Okay. It's like peer-to-peer. You can rent your own car, right? Rent your own car. It's underutilized maybe, and you can rent it for a few days on there. And it's like the Airbnb. They used to like to be called the Airbnb of car sharing. Now they don't like that so much since Airbnb gets a lot of bad press. So now they're just their own. What made this relationship work, of course, is that they provided us a bunch of data for transactions within 4 months. We looked at about 8,244 transactions, which are kind of trips. I was going to mention, in Kalamazoo, 3 cars were available on Turo. But they were better, they were actually just a few dollars more than Enterprise. I still went with Enterprise. Oh yeah, I was going to say, the tagline for Turo is avoid the checkout lane. And I'm telling you, for the Enterprise car, it was something like a few dollars less than any of the Turo cars. So I'm like, of course I'm going to save a few dollars and go to Enterprise. And but I was in the checkout lane for 45 minutes as they continually tried to upsell me. and they were a little deceitful. Not if anyone from Enterprise here. Anyway, I had to like stick to my gut. I almost felt like it was a hard sell. I'm like, hey, here's my quote. I just want what I was quoted, And that's what makes Turo so convenient, right? It's just like an Airbnb. You have a price, or Uber, Lyft. This is the price. The transaction's done. Someone could hand you the keys. They also have a Turo to go option where they can actually you can unlock it remotely without having anyone there. But anyway, we looked at these transactions. It's a statewide study looking at Illinois, and we didn't look at we didn't survey the users. We couldn't do that. It was anonymized by zip code, but we did have information for each of these. We didn't have any conversation, although there is some research out there that I could point you to. Shaheen had a study in 2018 about kind of preferences among peer-to-peer car sharing generally. This is what, it's an urban phenomena in Illinois for sure. Most of them are in here. This one's showing, let me see, we have only 1% are outside of kind of the 7-county area of Chicago Metro. Only 7% of all the transactions. That's probably because a lot of these areas, you have, parking's not a problem. You use your car. You're not going to rent it out because you're using your car to get around, and all these. So in rural areas, it didn't seem to be that much of that popular, but definitely fairly popular. City of Chicago had 73% of all the transactions. Some of the assumptions we made as part of this research is that the host already had the car, because we did also a cost analysis as part of this. So they were renting out their own private car. Host is willing to forgo the car, obviously, for a number of days. So it's different than Zipcar or iGo or some of the Car2Go. They're more hourly rentals or 15-minute blocks or something like that. The average rental for these are about 3.2 days, I think, is what we calculated. So it's several days. So it's more of like an Airbnb. We had a cost model. We looked at, we estimated the maintenance of the car, the fuel costs. We're not, because you're required to, fill up the car. Vehicle cleaning, we assumed you had to pay a little bit each time you rent it out. Supplemental insurance is a little bit more. And then the platform, if you were going to rent your car on Turo takes 25% of that transaction, of that revenue. So we looked at this, and some of our findings here. When the cost of insurance and so on, we found that, first of all, it's relatively profitable. Like when we look at shared mobility, part of this is, sharing capital, sharing what you have. People who are sharing their cars and on this platform found that 95% of the transactions are likely to be profitable to the host based on those assumptions. The average transaction net's about $89, and I said that it's for a 3-day rental. So the profit margin be about 65%. SUVs were more profitable than minivans. Minivans are the least profitable, and so on. So that you could kind of go through this. The other part of this that was interesting was that if you look at this profit potential, what does it mean for a household to share their vehicle if it's available? If you're a low-income household making about $40,000 annually and you rent it out, you could be supplementing your income by about 6.2%. It's not a ton of money, but it's about $2,500 roughly on average in net income annually. Some characteristics of the zip codes. You can see here, in fact, maybe do I have? Yeah, and the other part of this is that what we found is that the net benefits really flow more heavily to areas that are least advantaged economically. Minority as well as household. In fact, you had, I think you can see it here, percent minority population was 48 in the Chicago area. Zip codes that didn't have any transactions was about 48%. Those with transactions about 51%. Also, we found that areas where people are taking public transit, they were renting out their car more because they didn't maybe need their car as much. So they have a car, or maybe it's a 2006, which is the oldest car you can have and share it on the platform. But they're essentially kind of like what Shared Use Mobility Center calls super sharers. If you start sharing, you end up sharing more. So we kind of saw that effect. We were doing some research also on Airbnb, so we were like, hey, let's compare the two, geographically, and we found that it's actually more democratic in terms of geographic distribution than Airbnb. Probably people have more capital sunk into a car and are able to, rent that out than they are with their house and be able to rent that out. Maybe they're renters or something as well. So in other words, maybe this is a real opportunity for some people to share a car and make some income. Anyway, so those are a couple of the studies, but feel free to go to the Chadwick website. We have others. A couple of them are in more academic forms, through the Transportation Research Forum. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
So for your first study for the e-scooter in Chicago, I'm not familiar with that. So where do people usually ride? Is like more bike lane, sidewalk, or on the road? Or do you see any safety issues?
There are major safety issues. I was at one of the new mobility task force meetings where they brought in stakeholders. They brought in stakeholders a few times while we were talking about. And the group that was most vehemently opposed or vocal about, concerned about e-scooters were low vision population, people with different abilities, because the concern is that, they may have a small footprint, but if it's sideways on the pavement, or not parked properly, then it could obstruct, a sidewalk. And even riding on the sidewalk, how are you going to enforce people riding on, not to ride on the sidewalk? That's we talk about these big red zones, but these really slim red zones, if they're just using GPSs or other, you're not going to be really able to track that and enforce that very well. So there's a lot of concern about that. That's why I think one of the reasons is you see in Chicago, at least, they're putting it into areas that are a little less dense, areas where, and I skipped over some of the case studies, but California, defined what an e-scooter is. More states are kind of defining what they are, but they're oftentimes leaving it up to the cities to decide where they can operate. Some of them they can operate on the sidewalks. Some of them they say only in the bike lanes. Some say on the street. I know that when we were doing that study, Bird lent us a scooter, and we went out on like State and Jackson or something. There are no bike lanes. I'm just like, where do I ride this thing? And I felt like I was pissing off the pedestrians if I went on the sidewalk, and then I was just, the cars didn't know what to do with me when I was on the street. This is very dangerous. Yeah. So I do feel that, but in other areas, you could feel comfortable. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing, okay, so you saw that, I mentioned that one study in Salt Lake, but there have been something like, I think, 4 identified fatalities related to e-scooters in the past year. And I think in all of bike share, like the docked bike share and so on, there have been only 2, since like 2012 or something like that. So it's a little more dangerous, but they do have liability. The scooter companies assume liability with that, yeah, and so do the bike share companies, I believe. Yeah.
And so, Scott, you were saying that your trips that you were studying for your travel times, they are all 7 miles and shorter.
Yeah.
Because it looked to me like the scooters were essentially the same as transit and or better than transit from a travel time perspective.
Yeah, I had to.
A minute or 2.
Oh, with just the travel times?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there was, what we looked at is, we looked at, here's walk transit alone, and you're saving a few seconds. I mean, it's going to be better than walk transit if you add, but just e-scooter rental alone could beat out some of these trips. The majority, I had to look at the distribution of trips because it's a wide range, but I think most of them were actually shorter trips. It's actually, we did it, but we did an origin and destination comprehensive within each of those zones. So I had to look at that again to see how it looks. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So is the helmet problem, like most riders are not wearing helmets. Is that solvable? Are there strategies to encourage people? I know a couple of them give
Yeah.
helmets.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
They still don't wear
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Thoughts of how to resolve it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of debate in the transportation, area planning area about what to do with that, because I think, conventionally has been this concern about just safety and helmet use, but then at the same time you had, Seattle on their, it's always pointed to Seattle with their docked bike share system. Pronto was the only one that really failed, bigger one that failed. Why? And a lot of research pointed at the fact that they had the helmet law. So in other words, do we want people to ride, to use more, say, sustainable forms of transportation? I mean, granted, there were probably some injuries, only 2 fatalities in docked bike share, since 2013. So it's hard, how do we, and you see a lot of, I think the problem is we need to get the infrastructure in place, to make it safer. But there's a lot of debate in the transportation planning, and research area about how do we balance that? Yeah, because obviously if people aren't willing to wear a helmet, and that's like 90% of users. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. No. Thank you.